To Greece first, banks are closed, food and petrol are being stockpiled. Greece is a country in crisis. Next Sunday, the Greek people will vote in a referendum to decide whether to accept new bailout terms from the EU, the IMF and also the European Central Bank. It will also decide on whether the country stays in the Eurozone and indirectly on the political future of its Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras. In a moment, I'll be talking to Suzanne Lynch, Irish Times European correspondent. But first, I'm joined from Athens by Konstantin Mikolos, the President of the Athens Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And with me in studio, Paul Murphy, TD with the Anti-Austerity Alliance. First of all, to come to you, Konstantin, I gather you're likely to have an encounter with Mr. Tsipras today. What will you be telling him?
Well, the appointment has gone back time-wise because there is pressing business as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, so I do hope that we will be seeing each other later on. And what we intend to put forward to him is that Greece is living through unprecedented and nationally crucial moments, and we are not any longer on the brink of disaster, but I would say that we're one step beyond that. And the division that some people are trying to foster is driving us faster towards this precipice. And given the current situation of the country, I accept that there are no easy solutions. And unfortunately, we cannot afford to wait until the end of the week for the result of this referendum. So we will have to either strike an honourable deal with our partners by late tonight in order to restore stability, confidence and liquidity in Greece, or we will be forced to live the most devastating national catastrophe our country has ever experienced during peacetime.
So who are you blaming for driving the country to the precipice? Is it the people in Brussels led by the head of the Commission, Mr. Juncker, and the ECB and the IMF, Ms. Lagarde? Or are you blaming the Greek government?
It is true that our country's creditors and partners bear part of the blame for the impasse in the negotiations. However, I don't think that we should respond negatively to that, because Greece has no alternatives, and we have to make this clear to everyone. I would say enough with the obsessions and fictions, because time has simply run out. And those who believe that a return to the Greek drachma will make us better off may simply have a look at past statements that the current Minister of Finance, Mr. Varoufakis, made about the impoverishment of 80% of Greeks just a couple of years ago. And I think that the time has come for the Prime Minister, Mr. Tsipras, to put the country above everything else. And he has to reach a decision with our partners, with the support of the wider majority of the Greek people and the wider majority of pro-European political forces. And the reason why he has put back the meeting which we had today is that he is at the moment, or rumours have it that he is at the moment in a negotiating process, and we should have something, as I said, hopefully by the end of today.
Are you saying that you want him and his government to accept the deal that he is so opposed to?
Let me put it very, very simply, and this is said by someone who represents the Greek business community, and the brunt of these measures, recessionary measures, are initially brought on the backs of the private sector. It's much better to be left standing up and still being able to negotiate. In other words, being in the game, being in the playing field, rather than being excluded completely from the playing field and without having a production base that you can support your own people. It would be absolutely disastrous for Greece to be out of the Eurozone, out of the European Union. There is no other option but to stay within the game. I understand that these measures are very difficult. However, we will be able, after we regain a certain credibility towards our partners and lenders, to hopefully change the mixture of economic policy that will be applied, so that we can return back to the path of growth, and our creditors will be able to receive the loan installments.
Stay with us if you can, pardon me, Konstantin, but to come to you, Paul Murphy, just to take a quote from this morning's Irish Times, quoting a pensioner there in the centre of Athens. Our Prime Minister spoke of upholding our dignity when he called the referendum referendum, and where are we now? Standing outside the bank with no access to our money. Whoever was foolish enough to vote for those people in the last election will be even greater fools if they go along with the government and vote no next Sunday.
Well, there's a popular meme going around Greece at the moment that says if the international media had paid as much attention to the queues outside food banks over the past couple of years, perhaps they wouldn't be in this situation. The decision to attempt to collapse the Greek banking system, which has resulted in capital controls and withdrawal limits being imposed, was a decision made by the European Central Bank, acting in concert with the Eurogroup. It's a decision of the establishments within Europe to attempt to bully the Greek people to vote for more disastrous austerity that will result in the debt increasing and increasing. It's an incredible intervention in a democratic process in a country, and it's the kind of bullying that we saw in Lisbon too and Nice too, but multiplied by 10. I mean, Juncker's speech yesterday saying, don't commit suicide because you're afraid of the fear of death, when suicide has increased by 35% in Greece, and saying explicitly, if you don't vote the way we want, we're going to kick you out of the euro. And people should not accept that bullying.
So what do you think they should do? Just vote no in the hope that Greece can continue to get money that it can't afford and has no hope of paying back?
So either way, Greece cannot pay this debt. If the deal is accepted, more austerity, over 8 billion euros worth, is agreed. The economy will shrink further than the 25% it's already shrunk. The debt will grow bigger than the 180% it's already grown to, from 110% before the deals started. So either way, this debt is unsustainable and cannot be paid. I think the first decision to make after a no vote is to not pay the IMF the money, is to complete the process of the Debt Truth Committee, which is initiated by the Greek Parliament, which is looking into the sources of the debt and has preliminarily found that the Troika debt is odious and illegitimate, that 90% of it didn't go to the Greek economy but went to bail out German and French banks, which is the cause of this whole crisis, and they should refuse to pay that debt. There is a primary surplus in the Greek economy, so the Greek state takes in more than it spends on all public services and only has a deficit because it pays these bondholders.
I'll come to Suzanne Lynch of the Irish Times in Brussels in a few moments, but first of all, Constantine Mikolas, what do you say to those arguments?
Well, thank you for allowing me to intervene. I hear it with tremendous interest. However, one question pops in mind. It sounds very good, but if someone can provide the necessary information of how can a country without a production base, when you have consumer requirements as far as food is concerned at 52% that needs to be imported, when you've got energy requirements that 82% of the total energy requirements need to be imported, and without a sustainable production base, how will they be able to support a national currency away from the euro?
But the choice here is not yet a question of the euro or not the euro. The choice is a question of an austerity deal that is on the table. And the reverse can be posed. How can, if the Greek economy is pushed through yet more horrific austerity, the economy will shrink further, the productive base will shrink further, how can any debt be paid, how can any employment be created? So the decision of the Greek people should be respected. If it isn't respected, well then the productive base depends on what level of investment you have on the economy and what level of growth you can generate. The only way to generate growth now in the Greek economy is to break with the downward internal deflationary cycle of austerity and austerity and austerity. That's the most important decision that has to be made, and the first step is lifting this debt burden. I mean, it's just if you pay 4% of your GDP a year on paying debt that is odious debt, well then how can you invest in real production, in services for people and so on?
Despite the content of austerity measures that took place in Greece between 2010 and late 2014, we got to a level back in September of 2014, almost a year ago, where the stability factor had returned back to the market. We saw a number of sectors within the business community that were stabilized. I'm not talking about actual growth, but at least we saw stability, and that was a very, very encouraging sign. However, because of all the political declarations that were made from October 2014 onwards, knowing the previous government, knowing that there was a presidential election coming up in February of 2015, which they couldn't avoid, and also discussions from the political parties in opposition at that time, with Syriza, the first one, claiming for an early election. Then it all went sour again. And unfortunately, we had this election back on January the 25th, and ever since it's been downhill. So the measures were starting to pay off almost a year ago. And I'm sure that if we stand again within the playing field, and we can renegotiate certain parts that will enhance growth into the economy. This is the major concern of the business community here in Greece, that we have to enhance growth. It's the only way out, because it's only the private sector that will be able to create jobs. I remind you that we have the absolute negative European record as far as unemployment is concerned, currently standing at 25.8%. It's only the private sector that can rectify that situation. So we need to enhance the private sector.
Constantine.
We can't do it on our own, because it's very simple. We don't have the necessary means to be able to support ourselves. So we need to find a solution within the European Union, within the Eurozone.
Constantine, it sounds like you and fellow business leaders will be appealing to the people to vote yes to this deal on Sunday. How strong do you think the prospects of the government being defeated then in the referendum are?
I think it's going to be a very close call, and I think and hope that the yes vote will be even marginally ahead from the no vote.
And I think I'll let you go, Constantine, because I'm sure you have lots of other calls to make and to take. Constantine Michalos, of the President of the Athens Chamber of Commerce and Industry. To come to you in Brussels, Suzanne Lynch, I see a quote in the Daily Telegraph today from the Greek Finance Minister, Mr. Varoufakis, effectively threatening to sue the EU institutions and to seek a court injunction to block any effort to expel it from the euro. And they're talking about taking advice and considering an injunction at the European Court of Justice if any such move is made, because it's just not provided for in any of the European treaties.
It's possible. They haven't confirmed that yet here in Brussels about that report. But, I mean, there's a lot of legal questions about a lot of aspects that have happened over the last week, not least whether the referendum in Greece is even legally possible, because they're not supposed to have referendums on fiscal measures. So there's legal question marks everywhere you turn here in this on this issue. And then one of your correspondents or your contributors there was making the point that the ECB is kind of acting, I suppose the implication, without, beyond its mandate, by effectively forcing the Greek government to impose capital controls. A lot of people in the ECB would say that already the ECB has been going past its mandate by keeping the banks going for this long on emergency funding. So, no matter what way you look at this, you can bring legal arguments to bear on every angle, I think, in this saga.
And what's your sense of that speech that was made yesterday by the President of the European Commissioner, Jean-Claude Juncker, effectively using language that could be considered to be quite emotive and maybe not the most wisely judged of language as well?
Yeah, that goes without saying that his reference there to suicide was badly judged. One can only think he wasn't speaking his first language, that he meant something else. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, and people are saying here that while he was trying to rally the Greek public, he may have actually achieved the opposite in the speech. But it was very wide-ranging. He spoke for nearly a half an hour. He touched on everything from when Greece first joined the European Union in 1981. He talked about how personally he'd been involved in the negotiations. He talked a lot about solidarity and how, this isn't about pitting one country against 18 others. And he said a number of times about the other Eurozone countries that you have to think of those countries. And again, he mentioned Ireland, he mentioned the other bailout countries, but I think he was implying these other poorer East European countries in the European Union and the Euro, countries like Bulgaria, Slovakia. There's huge opposition to any further concessions to Greece from those kind of countries. Their GDP is much lower than Greece. Their pensions are much less generous than the Greek pensions, and that's the reality. So, it's very hard to sell this idea of further concessions to Greece to a lot of those poor Eastern European countries in particular.
What do you say to that point, Paul Murphy?
Well, I say first of all about the Jean-Claude Juncker speech that it was peppered with falsehoods. The idea that the Greek side walked out of the negotiations is false. He claimed that the proposal... Well,
I don't think that's the case, Paul. I think they did. They broke off negotiations on Friday. That's not exactly what happened.
No, it's not what happened. You're taking the line from the so-called creditors.
I'm not taking the line. I'm trying to tell the facts. There's been constant spin from the Greek side on this as well. So you think they didn't walk out from the negotiations on Friday?
Correct. Varoufakis was asked to leave at a certain stage so the Eurogroup could continue without him, which is an unprecedented
That's
measure.
Saturday. That wasn't Friday. That's Saturday.
A matter was...
You're confusing. The Friday I'm talking about from negotiations.
Okay, and I think the role of the media in this, to be honest, I think Suzanne Lynch's articles have been consistently biased and taking the side of the so-called creditors, the Troika. In a recent article, she referred to Tsipras as a self-styled Che Guevara figure. That's not unbiased journalism. It's taking the line of the establishment and repeating the propaganda here. Juncker claimed that the institutions...
Before you go any further, I want Suzanne Lynch to come back on that if she wishes. Suzanne?
I think I'll just leave that, actually, Sean.
But I just think the behaviour of...
He continued. No, I'd say one thing. That was an analysis piece that I wrote, and in the Irish Times we have a strong division between news and analysis, and I'm not going to get into a defence of my work with Paul Murphy on radio. I would like him to get back to the factual
Sure,
issue.
okay, so
the
can I deal with...
did break off negotiations on Friday. That's exactly what happened.
No, that's not accurate. So on a factual issue, Mr Juncker claimed that the proposal of the institutions does not include any cuts on pensions. That is completely inaccurate. Even Peter Spiegel, the correspondent for the Financial Times, tweeted, "Sorry, this is not true. Creditors' bailout includes phasing out of ECAS Solidarity Grant. This is a pension cut regardless of what Juncker says." He claimed that the measures the Commission is putting forward are socially just. That's not accurate. They're abolishing heat oil subsidies. They're enabling people who earn less than €1,500 to have money taken directly from their wages. They're heaping more tax on ordinary people through payment on VAT, on basic goods, etc. And so there's a massive spin going on about this, right? And the line is the Greeks broke off negotiations, they're unreasonable, they're not capable of negotiating, they're unprofessional, etc., etc., etc. And what's being ignored here is the question of democracy. What everyone fears is democracy.
Come back to the points. Sorry, sure. You've dealt with that now and Juncker's speech at some length, but what about the point Suzanne Lynch made? And by the way, sorry, I don't think it's right for you to accuse somebody of bias. I think Suzanne Lynch is a professional, honest journalist reporting things as she sees them. And by the way, you could say that to describe your man as a self-styled Che Guevara is a compliment.
No, it's an
but hold on.
No, but let's go back. It's a ridiculously insulting comment. I'm not questioning.
Let's go back to the people of East Europe.
I'm not questioning her integrity as a journalist.
In Bulgaria, Romania, the Czech Republic, or Latvia, or Lithuania, these people are living in countries that have a far lower GDP and income per head of population than the people in Greece. They're not in favour. I mean, where does democracy apply to them?
No, but working people across Europe should not be paying for this crisis. The crisis should be paid by the banks in Europe, and the bondholders in Europe, which are responsible for the crisis.
But they are paying for the crisis. They have lent them billions of euro, and that's the problem.
No, they're not. Suzanne, if you're going to be accurate, you'll know that 90% of the money that went to Greece from the Troika did not go to the Greek economy. It went back out. It went onto the balance sheet of Greek people, and they'll pay for it now forever unless they reject this deal. And it went back out to bail out the banks. That's what's happening here, just like what happened in Ireland. And I think people across Europe can hopefully see this. This is not a question of the people of Greece against the people elsewhere in Europe. It's a question of ordinary people, the 99% across Europe versus the 1% represented by the Junckers and the Merkels and the Hollandes and the rest of them.
Suzanne?
I just want to get back to the facts, actually, not engage in any of this kind of more ridiculous discussion with Paul Murphy there. The fact is that there's two deadlines today. The IMF repayment of 1.6 billion, it looks like Greece will not pay that repayment. But more importantly, the second bailout expires. I think this is probably more significant because this could give the trigger for the ECB to react further and withdraw the emergency funding and essentially let the Greek banks go. So what we might see today, and what I was reporting today, is there's definitely a sense that there's a diplomatic offensive to try and get some deal agreed by the end of today. But what does seem likely is that in any event, the second bailout that expires today, it's very late now to get that extended. And Kenny said that as well this morning, because technically it has to go to a lot of parliaments, 5 other parliaments, including the German parliament. So that looks unlikely. I mean, the only possibility is that maybe the Greeks would apply for a third bailout, if you like, because they legally, again, can request that. So, I mean, there is this conundrum, and somebody called it a parody of a referendum, that Tsipras called a referendum for next Sunday on something that will not exist anymore because that bailout expires today. And also, I think it's showing, again, very bad political judgment by Alexis Tsipras that he's actually putting this to the people when they will have been faced with about 5 days of bank closures and capital controls. So, of course, that's going to galvanise more people maybe to vote yes. and say, hang on, we're not sure about this route, we better get back to the negotiation table.
Just before I go back to Paul Murphy, Suzanne, the suggestion is that Chancellor Merkel is taking a much lower profile than other European leaders, particularly in these days, because I suppose her name is kind of red rag to a bull in Greece. But she is saying as well, cautiously perhaps, that rather than meaning that Greece will leave the euro or indeed the European Union, that a no vote in Sunday will influence the future of the euro. So she's leaving a bit of space there for negotiation, surely.
Yeah, I think her position is critical there, as you say. She has been very quiet over the weekend. She wasn't that strong in her comments yesterday in Berlin. Now, there's been divisions between Merkel and Schäuble. Schäuble would be considered as much more kind of rules-based and taking a harder line against Greece. Angela Merkel has got the bigger picture in mind. I think the presence of France here is also important. Hollande spoke with Obama last night, and sources here in Brussels said that in the Eurogroup meeting on Saturday, the only friend, if you like, Greece had around that table of 19 ministers, including Varoufakis, was the French finance minister. That France had been the ones trying to push some kind of agreement. Even Italy, who would take the side of France on a lot of these things, the left-wing government, have become frustrated with Greece. So, and we might see Hollande maybe playing a role here and trying to get some kind of deal over the next 24 hours.
OK, Suzanne, thanks for that contribution. That's Suzanne Lynch, Brussels correspondent with the Irish Times. Paul Murphy, you're actually off to Athens yourself, are you, for this referendum?
I am, hopefully. Yeah, I'm going now on Friday morning, and we'll be there to try to campaign alongside series of people for a no vote. I think if Enda Kenny and the European leaders are serious about further negotiations, they should withdraw from the table the threat that if the Greek people vote no, they're automatically out of the euro. They should respect their decision. And I think all of us across Europe who are in favour of a democratic Europe, a Europe that works for the millions as opposed to the millionaires, have a duty to intervene.
But do you think they should basically provide a bottomless pit of money to keep the Greek banks open?
I think the ECB should maintain emergency liquidity assistance until
they're up now
the
on 89
referendum.
billion. Just how much more should they go? Knowing full well, as you say, they haven't a prayer of getting this money back.
The Irish banks are on 140 billion. I mean, the ECB is capable of printing money, of making money out of nothing in any case. So I think they should leave,
but there's a
the
big
ELA
difference
line
here,
open.
though. The Irish banks never closed. There always was money in the ATMs in this country.
But if the ELA had been cut off...
there was never any suggestion that we were not going to do anything other than repay.
Well, what do you think the threat by the ECB to Noonan that a bomb will go off in Dublin, a bomb will go off, it won't be in Frankfurt, it'll be in Dublin. What was that threat? That was a threat to cut off ELA to the Irish banks in order to prevent burning of bondholders. So this isn't the first time this has happened. They throw their weight around. There's a great quote from Mario Puzo, who says that finance is a gun and politics is knowing when to pull the trigger. And they've basically pulled the trigger on European democracy and on Greek democracy here. And I think everyone, the 99% across Europe, has a duty here. There's a protest tonight at 6 o'clock at the Dáil against the water charges legislation, but in solidarity with the Greek people, and on Saturday at 12 o'clock at the Central Bank.
If that's not a catch-all protest, Paul Murphy, I can't think what might be. Thank you indeed for joining us. That's Paul Murphy, TD, from the Anti-Austerity Alliance. My thanks as well to Suzanne Lynch, Europe correspondent with the Irish Times, and to Konstantin Mikolos, President of the Athens Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Today with Sean.